So Alex, the stage is yours.
Perfect, thank you, Peter. So I'll try to stay in my area so that you always hear me, because the problem with me is always that I like to walk around while doing presentations, so I really need to concentrate. So let's stay focused. As Peter just said, I'm the head of the European Certification Test Lab, and with this I really have some technical backgrounds, and this is how I want to get started with all these explanations. The one thing that I basically work with on a daily basis are profiles. And this is the most important thing when you think about how do I start a development? How do I develop a OPC UA application and then also a UAFX application at the end? You need to look at what is mandated from me, what is required that I need to integrate, which feature set. And for that, the FLC team has defined the UAFX controller profile, or the UAFX controller 2023 profile, which gives you like all the individual things that you need to look at and that you need to integrate. So you find the server aspect in there, so you need of course an OPC UA server. You need an automation component and the asset definitions, and with bringing all of this together, at the end you get your full-blown UAFX application ready. What you also find in here is that actually the UAFX implementation or specification utilizes profiles and facets which are coming from the core specification. In that case, they mark with a light red or with an orange. That is the periodic fixed publisher facet, for example, or the subscriber facet, because for the bidirectional communication, you actually need both. In addition to that, there's always the option to integrate safety, and that is what you see on the bottom side. So you can always extend your feature set with the safety component or with the safety specification. And this is really independent of the type of the controller. So this is a generic controller profile that works for PLCs, DCS controllers. This is like the common base that we're looking at. And all of those profiles are defined in part 84, except for the ones which are coming from the UA core specification. That is then in part 7, or the profile application that you find online. And this also gives you an idea on, so how do I need to start, right? What is my path? How do I come from an OPC UA application, from an OPC UA controller, which already has an OPC UA server included, to an actual UAFX controller? Of course, you need to tackle the individual items, right? It doesn't make sense to just say, okay, you need to get started somewhere. And when you look at the controller, what potentially you have right now is a UA server that is just providing the data in a standardized format to the upstream world. What you now need in addition for all the horizontal communication is in fact PubSub, and this is the PubSub UDP UADP facet that you now need to implement. You then keep extending that with specific information models. Those information models are for the configuration of the communication and also the definition of actually the content of your controller, like the assets which are included. That is the asset information model. And by adding all of them up, at the end, what you get is an application that is capable of doing OPC UA PubSub for the actual runtime communication between the controllers, and it is supporting or providing the asset information as well as current information to the upstream. The next thing that you need is the actual connection manager integration, because somehow you need to configure everything. You need to tell the application where to send the data, right? And this happens with the UAFX connection manager facet. And the very last thing that you then have is the offline descriptor, which is a rather independent working item which you need to do offline engineering. So if you just think about how everything comes back together at the end, when you're in your engineering phase and you don't have the running controller under your hands, you still need to do the engineering. And all of these information to actually prepare these things, this is part of the offline descriptor, which, like I said, is a very standalone thing. The one thing that you always need to keep in mind with OPC UA is in fact security, and that is also, you'll see a few more slides on that, but in every of these individual steps there are security implications. So what are the good news? The good news is, even though it sounds like a lot of work, in fact there are solutions that help you to integrate all of that, and that is at foremost commercial SDKs and open source SDKs that are out there. So you can they can already take care of many of the things that you need to integrate. They can provide you a base for the automation components. They can provide you the base for the actual functional entity if you already know what these aspects are doing. But of course, they're always providing you the core communication aspects. So the UA server, the UA client, they provide you the pub/sub communication. All of that is handled by them, right? So that already offloads a lot of work that you can just gain. And there are several providers, you see a few listed here. Of course, there's always a path to implement everything yourself, which is something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend because, of course, you also need to keep in mind you need to maintain all of this code over the years. So I would always go with an SDK or with a toolkit. So we said security, that is always there, and that is of course also included in the whole UAFX topic. And there's actually one big thing coming up for all companies that are in Europe or that are doing business in Europe. So even if your headquarters is in Asia and you sell products to the European market, you need to fulfill this so-called Cyber Resilience Act or the CRA. The one thing that this requires is to look into cybersecurity. And the whole idea is to get more secure products. And it has requirements for communication, for the actual development, for securing interfaces. And because OPC UA and also with that UAFX actually provides this high level of security, it allows you to address many of those requirements in a natural way with OPC UA. Of course, it cannot go into everything, and also I cannot go into everything here in this session because there are a lot of details, and if you're interested in that, we can speak about all the requirements offline afterwards. But for now, let's just say that OPC UA and with this UAFX can help you with the security requirements for having products secure by design, because this interface, the technology is designed with having security in mind, right? So it already provides you like authorization for the users, for the applications, the whole security management piece, so you can do like certificate deployment, certificate management. All of these things are already defined in the standard, and with this you can really tackle a lot of those requirements. Looking into the actual communication, this also means that when you do your horizontal communication between the controllers, you can have secure communication. And that starts with signing communication or with an encrypted communication. And I'm not going to go into the security details. So for all the security specialists in here, I'm quite sorry for that. I have, you find the details on the slides, so you can read through them if they stay on long enough, but you can also talk to me afterwards. But again, it's just too detailed to go through all the individual aspects of that. The important thing is that the UDP communication provides you all those security mechanisms that are now coming with UAFX, but those the actual concept is of course generic, so it will also work for the whole cloud connectivity aspect. So we already talked about that UAFX is setting up the connections with a so-called connection manager. I heard that you just talked or tackled that like briefly in the session before me as well. So what you see here is that a connection manager is connecting to an automation component number one and automation component number two, calls a few methods in the address space, and with that establishing the connection so that you actually have your pub/sub communication. So the question here is then always, so where is all this security requirement? And all of this starts, of course, with getting the secure context configured. And that means you need to have the keys, the security configuration to actually do the signing and to do the encryption transmitted to the individual automation components. And this is part of the UAFX definitions. So when you look at that, you'll find here a push model. That means that the keys are actually pushed to the controllers, to the automation components. In this case, the connection manager creates the subscriber and pushes all the entities down. The connection manager creates the security groups in the so-called SKS, wherever this SKS is hosted. That's the security key server, so that is the overall arching entity that takes care of the keys for this specific communication. And then it pushes those keys to the publisher and to the subscriber, and that allows you to go into an actual secure communication. Now we know that there are scenarios where the push model is just not working, and for that reason, of course, there is also an alternative to that, and that is a pull model. That means, in that case, that the keys are actually pulled from the so-called SKS. In those two examples, one of those controllers was providing the keys to the other controller. So there was no external application involved. What you can, of course, also do, and what the spec allows, is to have all of this centralized so that you have a system management tool which takes care of those connections and which also takes care of the whole security context. And then you have your centralized push with external applications. So you see that from a conceptual point of view, a lot of these things are taken care of. And again, also here, the good news is because this is standard stuff, actually those SDKs, those toolkits are taking this already away from you. You don't need to implement all those details yourself. You can just trust on once it's there. So you need to, of course, make sure that your toolkit supports all this functionality, but then they take care of that, and you can just leverage and benefit from it. Looking into rather or more detailed workflow, this now means that you have the connection, so the connection manager connects to the SKS and sets all the security concepts up as an overview. Then in the next steps, connects to the different automation components and sets the connections. Then it tells the SKS to set the security keys, which then is happening by the SKS, and then you establish the actual connections for the real communication. And at the end, you have a direct communication, of course, going on between the automation components, and the SKS and the connection manager is not involved in the real runtime communication. So I know this is a little, from a concept, a little complicated if you think about it, but please feel free. We have security experts here. We have people here that have implemented all of that. So join us at the OPC Foundation booth afterwards, and you can go into all those details and ask your questions about how is this handled, what kind of applications are there, is there already something ready, which kind of toolkits support these functionalities, who can help me, where can I find more information. So just approach us. But with this, what you can have is a secure communication between your controllers and fulfill several CRA requirements that you're potentially meeting in 3 years, because that is when the CRA takes into or comes into effect. Because we started with the profiles, I want to bring all this security concept again into the context of profiles. What you see here is the connection manager profile, which includes all these SKS topics, and that again includes then the actual security requirements. This is on the right-hand side with the UFX SKS push facet. So you see that those profiles, you need to follow the breadcrumbs, but you find all the requirements for your applications in there. We actually have a so-called profile application tool, which really helps you to get a good overview, so you're not needing to do like searches through specifications to find the details. You can actually use a web front end that displays the info quite easily to you. Profiles are also the core of the whole certification aspect and the conformance testing. And when you look at that, in every profile you have so-called conformance units. They have the individual test cases. And there you already see that depending on the number of profiles and the number of conformance units, you have a lot of test cases that you're supposed to execute. Of course, this is nothing that we expect from the OPC Foundation or from the compliance team, that you do all of that manually. In fact, what we have is the compliance test tool, or the UA compliance test tool, the UACTT. That implements several testing scripts which will connect to your automation component, sets connections up, does test for handling the good cases, does test for handling bad cases. It will inject errors. It will try to break your automation component. But at the end, you have an automated test tool which is provided to all our members with what you can prepare yourself for certification testing, and just do that besides your whole development. So this is the whole idea, right? That is why we provide that early. And this is actually already available. So if you look at the released compliance test tool, you already find UAFX test scripts integrated, and you can configure that against your application and you can run them. Then what we also already have now is that you can register your UAFX applications online for certification testing. So if you are already ready, or if you are in the last preparation steps, please feel free. There's an online registration form that you can just pull up. You put in all the information and you can register your application for certification testing. And last but not least, that is something important to know, and that is why I want to point it out. We have talked about the safety test or safety initially. Safety testing is a complete separate testing tool, and for everybody who does safety, they know exactly why, because you need to go through a safety assessment with the tool and with every update that you're doing. And because OPC UA and UAFX is evolving and we have changes, we cannot bring both tools together, because otherwise we would basically need to stick with what we have, or for doing safety assessments for the whole year, right? So we just don't want to do that. So there are two separate tools, which one is doing the black channel testing, which is the normal UA communication, and the other one is doing the actual safety testing. So how can you verify, or how does an end user notice that the products that they purchase, that they use, are actually working fine? What we're doing here is we have created a protected identity, which is the OPC UAFX and the UAFX. And what the team agreed on very early is that there needs to be testing for that, and that the only allowance to actually use those terms, so OPC UAFX or UAFX, with a released product, is if you have run through the testing. So if you see that associated with a released product, you can actually trust in its UAFX functionality to work fine. This is what we created for all the end users out there. Okay, so with this, at the end for this session. So like I said, if you have any questions about security, about the CRA, about conformance testing or testing your OPC UA or UAFX applications, please feel free, just reach out to me the whole day at the booth and also tomorrow. Thank you.